right, hopefully I do this right. All right, welcome all of you. It's wonderful that you could all come out on this Thursday night. It feels like Thursday midnight. But we're very happy to have you. And we want to see your faces, our students. We haven't really been seeing except in our classes. And also for you to see us, maskless, mask free. But also to talk about some of the really cool courses that we're offering next spring, and to get you excited, and so you can get your friends excited as well. We're looking forward to a really wonderful semester. So we'll proceed sort of in alphabetical order. Let me see if people are here. Sarah, are you good to go? We'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I can share my screen, right? Let's see if that works.
It's allowing you to.
I do not see it. Well, no, I don't think I.
Let me try again. This is one part of Zoom that I always have trouble with.
Yeah.
You want to try again?
Yeah. Let's see. Sorry about this. Do you want to?
I know what I'm going to make you co-host, and that will probably try now.
Sure.
Sometimes that helps.
Yeah, that's good. Okay.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you. So let us see if we can. Slideshow. All right. Does everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so my name is Sarah Balakrishnan. I'm a historian of colonialism in Africa, specifically in West Africa. And the course that I'm offering next semester as a seminar is titled The Imperial Encounter in Africa. It studies what happens when white Europeans enter the African continent beginning in the 15th century. How do we understand that collision in terms of symbolic production, material results, and racial commodification? And how do we understand the forces and factors that led this relationship to eventually become one of colonial domination? So in the course of this class, we will be studying a great variety of primary sources. Some of them will be visual, others textual, forms of film and sonic. We will be looking at some of the major paintings that were constructed during this period, both by African artists and European artists, of how they understood each other. How did they come to understand the other? And how did they come to understand the influence of imperial rule or colonial rule on the African continent? So this, for example, is a painting by a Congolese artist of Belgian colonialism in the region. Throughout this course, we will also be looking at classic works by African artists and writers, thinkers, and essayists. Just two of the texts that we will be reading are Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart and Discourses on Colonialism by Aimé Césaire. Students will also have the option of doing their midterm essays on novels or films produced by African artists. We will also be looking at maps and photographs produced by some of the earliest European and African voyagers to each other's continents. In this way, we'll be thinking about the imperial encounter not just as the meeting of two different peoples or two different worlds, but also the meeting of different forms of presentation, different technologies of knowledge, and different technologies of representation that also exploded at this point of contact. And lastly, we're going to be looking at stories that make us really critically rethink the categories of what is African and what is European, what is Black and what is white. Through the imperial encounter, many generations of African people grew up hearing texts and ideas from European religions, from European forms of knowledge production, but they mobilized these as part of an arsenal to achieve political independence and self-independence. So in this way, stories like Donna Beatriz Kimpa Vita will be explored within this class as a way of trying to rethink the categories of African and European coming out of the imperial encounter. So in sum, the Imperial Encounter studies the genesis of colonial rule in Africa through the many different types of contested productions produced in the frictious encounter between Africa and Europe from approximately the 15th century to the 20th century. Thank you very much.
Oh, wonderful.
Mhm.
That sounds like an amazing course. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. Marlena, are you here? You ready to go next?
Sorry, I have a ghost behind me. I have my screen on, so it's possible I might have to turn it off so that I can focus. The ghost being my 7-year-old son. I'm going to share my screen also.
Let me make
have that
sure that,
capability. Yeah.
yes.
Do I have it? Okay. So hello, everybody. I'm Marlena Doubt. And I just wanted to give you a sense of what we would do in both of my classes, all in one kind of one little brief presentation. And I'll drop this link into the chat also so students can kind of see. This is a story map. So I'm a Caribbeanist. I work on Haiti and the Haitian Revolution. And so one of my classes is the age of the Haitian Revolution, which covers the Haitian Revolution, but in a very large Atlantic world context of the French Revolution and the US-American Revolutionary Wars, and a lot of wars taking place across Europe and the reverberations of the Haitian Revolution within that. The second course, Caribbean Literary and Cultural Studies, kind of gives a broad overview of Caribbean literature in the 18th, 19th, and early 20th centuries. In both classes, we will take the opportunity of being digital to work a little bit more on these story maps that I've used in previous classes, as well as the final project. So this is through Night Labs. So if anybody wants to go and check out their software just for their own purposes, you can make kind of interesting story websites with them. And it's a good way to kind of keep track of your research also. But what my students have done in the past in the Caribbean literature course with this project is they would take one of the books, for example, where someone is traveling kind of all around the Circum-Caribbean, and they map it. And so I'm going to just show you a little bit of what I have done with the first one I ever tried to make. And I've kind of left it up on the web as an example for this assignment, but also because people have found it useful just for thinking about the reverberations of the Haitian Revolution. It has a little bit of a learning curve, but once you kind of get into it, and there's a lot of tutorials that you can take, once you get into it, it sort of all falls in place. So everything that you drop on the map, you have on the other side of the screen kind of a text box where you can put all kinds of information and images. And so in the first one, I just explained kind of, if we thought of a Haitian Atlantic, since we talk about the French Atlantic and the Black Atlantic, sort of what would that look like? And then I dropped the nodes kind of all over, and you can see they take us to Trinidad, they take us to Cuba, to the United States, and the map just kind of moves along with you. So I have some Issues of Freedom's journal here that had a lot of information and literature about the Haitian Revolution in the early 19th century. And most of this was written by African-American, Black American writers of the time. And then I was just kind of mapping, oh, we went to New Orleans. So you can see how you just kind of drop your node. And so for the Caribbean literature course, that might be smaller. You can tell different kinds of stories. But the Haitian Revolution itself is also a story that involves basically all of Western Europe. It's sort of the First World War. So it's a really good project for mapping because England and Spain come to conquer the island. When Napoleon takes over, he brings Polish troops. So it's a story that's really quite broad. And so here I'm just mapping all of these Black American writers, some of whom were French speaking, but some not, and long gone, like Phyllis Wheatley, who appeared in French reviews alongside works about the Haitian Revolution, kind of juxtaposing them and making her story really a part of a larger story about Haiti in a sense. And so I won't go through everything, but this is just to give you an example. And so I talked about the traveling Wheatley there. It's a really interesting story that when the Abbé Grégoire in France translates some of her poems, and that's how they sort of circulate around France, along with some Haitian writers as well. So again, constant juxtapositions. And here I took us closer to the heart of Paris to understand that. And so yeah, I'll drop this in the chat so you can kind of get a sense. This is at a time when I was really working on African-American representations of the Haitian Revolution in the 19th century. So a lot of this deals with people like William Wells Brown and Frank Webb and Frederick Douglass and Martin Delaney. And so you can do all kinds of things. And this is like a little mini essay I wrote in there. So it gives students an opportunity to kind of do something a little bit different. And in the class, I would show you some examples of what students did, which they always surprise me because they get better at the technology than I am, and embed songs and graphics and all kinds of things. And so it's basically a different way to tell the story as a final project. So I will stop there. I will put this in the chat if you ever want to look at it, if you're interested, and to find out more about what might especially be covered in the Age of Haitian Revolutions class. Thank you.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Professor Dowd. And please feel free to drop, students, please drop questions in the chat for our faculty. Some of them might have to run, but I'll collect the questions and make sure that they do, you get some answers from them. Professor Schatz, are you here? You ready to go?
Absolutely. So I don't have anywhere near as aesthetically pleasing or extensive a presentation for you. Those were both beautifully done. I am teaching several courses next semester. I'm teaching 2 sections of Black femininities and masculinities in US media, which concentrates on the time period primarily between the early 1970s and the very early 2000s. And we examine different very influential media texts, films like The Color Purple, miniseries like Roots. We look at Shaft, and we end up looking at Shaft, all 3 kind of generations of Shaft, and comparing different ideals of Black masculinity. We basically examine the way that popular media has influenced the understandings of race and race relations in this country over time. And we intentionally don't concentrate so much on today's media, but what we do at the end is we take that kind of toolbox that we assemble, and then we apply those tools to today's media at the end of the semester. So I'm teaching 2 sections of that, one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday from 2 to 4:30. And then that's a little bit of an unusual thing that I teach that, because I'm actually an anthropologist who does work in Central Africa, in Gabon, where I concentrate on migrant experience, associational groups, and national identity. And I also do a lot with food. So, but my main concentration is in Africa. So the course that I'll be teaching on Thursdays from 2 to 4, it's called Peoples and Cultures of Africa. And it changes every time I teach it. So but it always does a number of things. We definitely try to concentrate on as many different areas around the continent as possible, because there's no way to teach peoples and cultures of Africa in any kind of, you can't even attempt to do an exhaustive search of such things. But we always concentrate on issues of kinship, descent and ethnicity, marriage, family and sexuality, labor, food, religion, symbol, ritual. And I do focus on urban Africa a good bit. And I try to get at the different topics that we examine through a number of different assignments and readings. So we do a lot with short stories. We do a lot with film. We will be watching films from Mali, one that addresses the problematics of the World Bank and the IMF across the continent. We'll be watching a film from Zambia called I Am Not a Witch. We'll be examining the Nollywood industry, the Nigerian film industry. We'll read an ethnography of Togo that deals with exchange, identity, rural and urban identities, and lifeways. And we'll talk about music, for example, as a protest, a political protest in Senegal. And then we'll also talk about, for example, why you don't see a lot of activist musicians in Guinea-Conakry. So we kind of jump all over the place, because we're trying to get a little taste of this and a little taste of that, but we pull it together by examining a lot of the same themes across different spaces and cultural worlds. So, so that's my class and the other 2 classes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Wonderful. So we're on a very, we have quite a number of courses for the Africa requirements. Next up is one more, Professor Hala Faton. Are you ready to go? If you want to unmute, there you go.
Yes, yes. I will be quite quick. I don't have slides to share, but I will be teaching this on Tuesday, Thursday. Both of these classes are sort of staple classes in the religious studies curriculum. And I've been offering them many years for credit for AAS majors. I always get some AAS majors in these classes, which is a delight. Many of them then go on to take maybe another class with me, which is very rewarding. So the first class will be a 9:30 class. Both these courses, by the way, are being taught in person. The room keeps getting shifted, so I think the 9:30 class will be offered in Maury Hall. It's called Introduction to African Religions. It's a 2000 level class. It offers an introduction to African indigenous religious systems that have originated south of the Sahara. We look at how African peoples have conceived of and related to God and other divine powers. We ask questions about what answers they come up with to fundamental questions concerning the meaning of life in the world. We ask, how have people's religious beliefs, traditions, and rituals shaped their societies, histories, and collective identities? There are a number of different objectives. The main objective is to help, maybe replace some of or think critically about some of the popular American stereotypes of African religions as Black magic and superstition, to replace this with an informed appreciation for the complexity and sophistication of African indigenous religious systems. We also analyze some of the ways in which Muslim and Christian scriptures, teachings, practices were embraced and interpreted and integrated with African cultures. That class has 2 unit exams. I give 2 unit exams and a final exam. I also often assign an issue project or an issue paper, which is a short assignment. And students do extremely well on this. I just today finished the last set, listening to the last set of issue presentations. This is an assignment in which I ask students to find a mainstream article, an article in the mainstream media that deals with African traditional or African indigenous religions. And then I ask them to select 2 scholarly articles that provide a more nuanced perspective, perhaps a more historical perspective, and enable them then to be more informed and be more critical when encountering generalizations about religion in the mainstream media, in particular African religions. And the presentations today were just superb. They're the best set I've ever had. So I'm eager to assign the same paper to another class. My second class is also offered on Tuesday, Thursday. It's offered, I think, from 12:30 to 1:45 is the time slot I was given. This one is a 3000 level class, Christianity in Africa. As I said, it's also being offered in person. This class meets the historical studies requirement or the historical perspectives requirement, depending on which gen ed track pathway you're in. And so it is quite historical in nature. We examine the history of Christianity in Africa from its roots in Egypt and the Maghreb in the 2nd century of the current era to contemporary times where nearly half of the continent's population claims adherence to the faith, to Christianity. Our historical overview will cover the flowering of medieval Ethiopian Christianity, 16th to 17th century Congolese Christianity, which Sarah was mentioning. We also look at Kimpavita, a very important figure in this period in Central Africa. We move on and consider European missions during the colonial period, the subsequent growth of independent churches, the emergence of African Christian theology, and recent examples of Pentecostal megachurches. We look at many different forms of Christianity over a very long trajectory. I'm very interested in religious change, so this is a central theme in all of my classes, but particularly in this one with its historical content. So I think that's it for me. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We have a question in the chat from Rishab. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Rishab is asking which of these courses fulfill the second writing requirement. If that applies to your course, faculty would just have popped that in the chat so that Rishab and others can know for that requirement, which of our classes will fulfill that. Thank you so much. All right, moving right along. Let's hear from another of our fellows. James, are you ready to go?
Yes, thank you everybody for coming tonight. I'm afraid I don't have a PowerPoint, so you're just gonna have to look at my slowly decaying face instead. I'm James Parker, I am a historian, and next semester I'm gonna be teaching development and the environment in modern Africa. Broadly speaking, the class is going to study the history and the present of economic development in Africa, as well as its effects on communities and their environments. We'll also be reading through and creating some alternatives to the firmly held image that African environments are solely to either be protected from local misuse, quote unquote, or to be pillaged for essential resources useful to the West, like most of the things in our phones. Fusing histories of imperialism and capitalism alongside works of African literature, philosophy, and activism, the class is also going to explore how rural African communities envision the human-environment relationship, as well as the ways that their exploitation has been framed as a benefit to the social and economic growth of the regions in which they take place. So in terms of structure, first we're going to begin with an overview of literature on development in Africa, mostly things deriving from Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And this is going to help us define the ideological impetus behind projects and understand some of the organizations involved. And we're also going to firmly link development to environmental issues in this first section. We'll then study case studies from across the continent that show how Western ideas of development have characterized African environments and the kinds of social and ecological prerequisites that they rest upon. After that, the class will foreground responses to such initiatives in rural communities in order to really demonstrate how the exigencies of global capitalism and colonialism have affected populations and clashed with diverse ecological understandings of the environment. It's here that we're going to get into works of activism, literature, and philosophy from groups like Decolonize in Kenya, and activists such as Wangari Maathai and Ken Saro-Wiwa as well. With these, we'll begin to center localized relationships with the environment and its role in human affairs. Finally, we'll move on to exploring a diverse number of continental environmental justice movements in the present and their intersections with global environmental movements. This final focus is going to lead on to a final project on rethinking environmental justice in the age of climate change. And collectively, this course will hopefully give students the historical and intellectual tools to really challenge pre-existing images of African environments and their status as exploitable and extractable resources. Rather, we're going to gain an understanding that places diverse ecologies within a wider image of society and human culture rooted in local needs. demonstrating the diverse ways of living with and alongside environmental resources amongst diverse African communities. Thank you.
All right, thank you, James. All right, guys, we have only a couple more. Let's go Brian, and then Professor McDowell will present on behalf of Professor Fields, who couldn't make it. And then I'll probably go, and I will save the best for last, just so you don't run out of the room. So of course we'll have to leave the illustrious Professor Otu for the end. He's the Booker Prize. He's the main Grammy Prize. So we gotta do that, right? So please stick around. I know some of you have a lot of things to do, so please stick around. We're almost done. After we present, we'll stick around for some Q&A, but we'll also want to give you a chance to mingle in some breakout rooms all by yourself, so you can talk about your professors and like, oh yeah, don't take that class, or take this one, this is a good class. Hopefully you can stick around for that. So Brian.
Yes, my computer is trying to save me from myself. It says that I can't share my screen because it's being recorded. So I think I'm gonna have to sign off and sign back in to show slides. So
all right.
I will be right back. Sorry about this.
All right, see you soon. Okay, who did I say was next? Was it Professor McDowell for Kimberly? You're on mute, Professor McDowell.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm reading this description on behalf of Professor Fields, who teaches courses on the environment, on environmental justice. But this course concerns issues of the Constitution, issues of law, as they connect to the environment. I'm assuming, let me read what she has sent. Law is everywhere. Well, we know that in our lives and in our society. It is a dominant force in our culture. Each of us is likely to feel the heavy hand of the law in one form or another at some point in our lives, some more than others. This course introduces students to the substance of the Constitution, the conditions under which it was developed, and the ways in which it has shaped and has been shaped by ideas about and considerations of race. Two main goals guide this course. Our first goal is to identify and appreciate the roles, ideas about, and considerations of race that race has played in shaping and influencing the ongoing processes of interpreting and applying constitutional law to our lives, our society, and our politics. Our second goal is to develop an increased awareness of the stark consequences of constitutional decisions for society, especially as these decisions pertain to marginalized populations. We will spend a good deal of our time reading, thinking about, and dissecting the influence of ideas about and considerations of race on key Supreme Court decisions that have shaped and directed constitutional law in America. This means analyzing, weighing, and debating the reasoning, logic, and wisdom of the opinions, particularly as they impact the lives of racially categorized and marginalized people in America. The reality is that 9 unelected justices, influenced by multiple internal and external factors, with life tenure in Washington, D.C., render decisions affecting basic fundamental questions in society: the death penalty, hate speech, in what ways the state can regulate and restrict life and liberty, the role of religion in public life, and so on. As we study the cases, be mindful of the political nature of the courts and judges. What is the court's proper place and role in American democracy, especially as regards the political, social, and economic status and well-being of minorities and historically marginalized people. How does one explain its inconsistent and at times illiberal decisions on issues involving race and the racial dimensions of inequality? What are the host of political pressures that influence the judiciary at various points in the legal system, from the court's formation to their decision-making, to other critical points in between? How should the Constitution be viewed? How should it be interpreted, applied, and used, considering that it includes things like the 3/5 clause and was the instrument used to construct governmental institutions, procedures, and norms that were designed to accommodate slavery and racial, ethnic, and economic discrimination? While Supreme Court decisions are core materials, this is very much an African American studies course. We are more concerned with the relationship between racism and the political, institutional, and policy implications of cases than about legal doctrine for its own sake. Our purpose is to understand what the court has said about the Constitution's meaning, to identify and assess the underlying theories, interests, and considerations that inform the opinions of the Supreme Court, and examine the effects of Supreme Court decisions on our society, especially as they apply to the lives and experiences of historically marginalized racial minorities. But because the court is also a political institution, we will consider how and to what degree constitutional decision-making resembles ordinary politics. To what extent, for example, does public opinion, particularly as relates to race, influence the court? Now, that's one meaty description, but that is what Professor Fields forwarded to us. And I think the meatiness of the description really matches the substance and rigor that typically define her courses. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor. Thank
yes.
you. Awesome, wonderful. All right, I see Brian's back. How are you doing down there?
Let's try again. Sorry about that. Yes, it looks like it's working now. So I'm going to share my screen here. All right. Hi, everybody. I am Brian Smithson, and I am a second-year postdoctoral fellow with the Woodson, Carter G. Woodson Institute. And the course I'll be teaching is one that I taught last spring. It's called Seeing Race, Sight, and Sound in the Black Atlantic. I believe it is offered at 9:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I should have written that down. But the idea with this class stems from my own work as a cultural anthropologist. I worked in Benin and Nigeria with filmmakers and was interested in not only the kinds of movies they were making and the kinds of stories and political projects they were trying to provide, but also the factors that were preventing them from doing that. What were the sort of political and economic and frankly racist factors that were keeping them from making the movies they wanted to make in the way they wanted to make them? So this course takes that question and expands it out to cover not only West Africa, but all of the African continent, the African diaspora. So we'll be reading texts that take us from places like Nigeria and Benin to the Caribbean. We'll read about Haiti. We'll read about African American media production here in the United States. We'll even go up into Canada. So this is a wide-ranging course geographically, but thematically, essentially, we are going to be talking about these kinds of questions. The roles that vision and hearing and sight and sound are playing in this thing called race, in creating it and sustaining it. And the ways that vision and hearing and production of media have been tools of both white supremacy and opposition to white supremacy. We'll look at these ideas such as aesthetics and performance and media and the role that they play in what has become a global struggle against white supremacy. And then finally, we'll look for ways that we, as the members of this learning community, can join with this struggle and try to advance it or amplify it. So for example, one of the assignments that that we do is called Boosting the Signal, where I ask students to find an artist that they really like from either it could be an African-American artist or somebody from Africa or the diaspora, and then really engage with that person's work and then find a way to amplify or review or promote that work online on Apple Music or something like that. We will be reading a few different texts from a sociologist who, this is a book that talks about sort of the technology and of surveillance and how that has been used as part of white supremacy. Then we'll look at Shine. This is an art historian named Krista Thompson. And so she really engages with the efforts by people specifically in the Caribbean and also in the United States to take that technology and appropriate it and use it for a political struggle. And then finally, we'll pair this with some a deep ethnographic anthropological look at the Vodou religion in Benin, where there are very important rules about secrecy, about what is not seen, what is not heard, these strategies that people in the African diaspora and in Africa have used to prevent things from sort of becoming the property of the white man. So I am excited about teaching this course again, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to share via email. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. Good job. Good job. All right. So our final two, I'll go ahead and go next again, saving the best for last here. we love to make fun with my younger brother, Professor O2. Here we go. My imaginary glass. Has anybody seen the HBO series Lovecraft Country? You may throw up a reaction, a thumbs up, or so on if you have. It's actually from a novel, Lovecraft Country, so the same title, that was released a couple years ago. It's phenomenal. If you haven't seen it, put that on your to-do list for the break. One of the things that's really amazing to me about the series is how it shows how Black fans of sci-fi encounter mainstream tropes that center white privileged worldviews, but also how Black folk experience those tropes, not necessarily as sci-fi, but as amplifications of the real. So what is horror, or a monster that eats your flesh or maims you, to Black folk whose close relatives were kidnapped, tortured, or experimented on? So that's the value of the Afrofuturistic or the global sci-fi and fantasy mode. Not to imagine places of escape necessarily, but to render realities of the Black or post-colonial condition that make escape impossible. Right? That show realities that jar us from the fiction, realities that make the normative tropes of mainstream sci-fi unstick or go out of joint. So in my 4,000 level course, Caribbean Sci-Fi and Fantasy, and I think it's 4570, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 3:30 to 4:45 p.m. So that's Caribbean Sci-Fi and Fantasy. We're thinking about who are sci-fi's others, beyond white Euro-American classics, beyond even the Afrofuturistic authors you might be familiar with. So although sci-fi and fantasy have become increasingly diverse in recent years, the Caribbean is still often ignored, either imagined as a rustic beach, where you go for your vacations, or a technological backwater. But in this undergraduate seminar, you'll encounter authors and authors from the English-speaking, Spanish-speaking, and French-speaking Caribbean, working at the very cutting edge of sci-fi and fantasy. You'll discover amazing, fun, mind-bending novels that center Caribbean settings, peoples, and culture, even as they expand the definition of genre. And this is absolutely my favorite course ever. The books are gripping, crazy. You're like, is this a novel? How do I read this? What am I looking at? They'll become your favorite works too, as they have mine. We go through the course in about 4 units. Unit 1, we will read novels about strange beasts, mythical creatures, and fantastic tales. In Unit 2, we'll read about time travel and time machines and thinking about how in Caribbean sci-fi, we don't have DeLoreans, we don't have spaceships, but they're really interesting and mind-bending modes of time travel that make you actually rethink what time travel and sci-fi might look like. In Unit 3, we'll read novels about space travel, aliens, and alternate worlds. And in Unit 4, we'll end up thinking about superheroes and cyborgs. Again, how they differ from mainstream ones. The kinds of assignments you'll do in this class are kind of the typical short critical essays, but you also, and this is, if you've taken my class, you know I love to do this. I like to do, you can alternate between critical and creative essays or creative projects. So one of the things that students in the past have done in our, say, in Unit 2 on time travel narratives is to actually map what would the world line of a time traveling character look like in this novel, right? Or how might I kind of diagram the spatial locations that characters move through in space operas, for instance. Because it's a 4,000 level seminar, your final paper is a long research paper, but you could do something, for instance, like comparing one of these Caribbean texts with your favorite mainstream sci-fi novel or film or series. And so it's a really fun course. I really love the kinds of things that students bring to this. And of course, it's just great page turning reading. It's something really great to read over a long, miserable winter. You will forget what the world looks like outside in this class. And so it's a humanities course, and also will fulfill your second writing requirement. My second course is a 3,000 level seminar, Currents in African Literature. It is focused on Adichie and Okorafor. It's an in-depth study of literary works of two brilliant, prolific young Nigerian women writers, one a feminist and social realist, and the other an African futurist. Now, it's a reading intensive course. We'll read all the three major full-length works by each of the authors in pairs. So after a foundations unit, thinking about the danger of a single story and how applicable are Western feminist theories and realist narrative modes to non-Western experiences, we'll go through the course again in pairs across 3 units. In Unit 1, we'll be thinking about the post-colonial Bildungsroman and African girlhood. We'll be reading together Purple Hibiscus and the Book of the Phoenix, and thinking about how traditional literary forms, such as the Bildungsroman, are subverted by race, by gender, by post-coloniality, right? Does that form even work? Does that form even translate, right, to Africa? In Unit 2, we'll be thinking about the politics of race and tribal wars. So we're reading together Half of a Yellow Sun and Lagoon, and thinking about how these novelists approach the very same historical issues, one with social realism and the other with Afrofuturism. We're also thinking about who writes Nigeria's history, who tells Nigeria's story, and how, and what ethical challenges are associated with telling history. And then the final unit will end with Americana and the Binti trilogy. And we're thinking about African diaspora. So questions of home, identity, and migration. What happens to your Nigerian identity or your tribal identity when you migrate and there's no red soil with which to recenter yourself when you go through traumas, right, in exile. So at the end of each unit, you write either a single author or a comparative short essay. But your final project is a contemplative portfolio. So you gather all the pieces you've written across the 3 units, and then you review them and think about how your ideas about these topics and these authors have evolved. And so your final project is a contemplative essay, thinking about what you've learned about African women writers in general, about Adichie and Okorafor's literary strategies in particular, and comparing and contrasting how they treat similar themes very differently. One of my favorite assignments in this course, though, is this ongoing news forum that we do. So I think every week you research, think about what's going on in the news in Nigeria. It could be about culture, it could be about history, it could be about politics, it could be about women in particular. And you'll post those on our news forum, but we'll also think about not just what you find, but really critiquing who's reporting on these news items. How are you learning more or sometimes wrong things about, right, Nigeria viewing from the West? And how do you actually find ethical and accurate sources about Nigeria? And so particularly thinking about what does it mean for Africans to tell their own stories, right? And how does looking at how they tell their own stories, how they perceive and narrate their own reality differ from the kind of received information that we have about these cultures? And so it's again a 3,000 level course. It will fulfill your Africa requirement and your humanities requirement. And it's a super fun course. So I'm looking forward to having you in one or either one or more of those classes in the spring. All right. And then last but by no means least, put your hands together.
Let me get some water first.
Nichelle, excuse
Yes,
me.
ma'am.
Nichelle,
Go ahead.
and I hope I'm not putting Sabrina on the spot. Sabrina is here.
Oh, I didn't see you, Sabrina. Did you want to, if you're...
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, hi.
I will walk into the spotlight. Thanks, Deborah. No, I'm kidding. Did you want to go first? We have to save Kwame best for last.
We have to save Kwame
Oh
for last.
my
We just
God.
no disrespect to you, Sabrina, but we have to.
May I beg to disagree, though I'm not moderating the meeting. Everyone is a star. Everybody is a star. So all of these courses are wonderful. So,
Oh, I love
all
that,
right.
Brian.
So they're shining on all of us. But Kwame, you know, he's extra.
Kwame is his own kind of star. That's it.
Well, I will just be brief. I wasn't sure if I would be able to make it, so I'm sorry that I wasn't on the program. But so I will be teaching the Souls of Black Folk, which is a course that takes the work of W.E.B. Du Bois, Zora Neale Hurston, as starting points to think about the social organization of Black communities. We look at issues such as education, we look at residential segregation, we look at health, we look at a lot of different kind of dynamics, and just try to understand how issues of race, class, gender, sexuality influence the lives of African Americans. And the second course that I will be teaching is Race, Culture, and Inequality. And in contrast to the Souls of Black Folk course, which is very much about kind of people's material resources across race, culture, and inequality is a lot about meaning making embodied in various forms, whether it's news media or styles of dress or art, visual art, children's literature. And we look at some of the social science research on those different forms of culture and how they're related to inequality. So I'm always welcome, you know, if you have questions about those courses, you're welcome to send me emails, and, you know, I will answer more specifically if you need more details. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, Professor Otu.
So I'm going to be very quick, and thank you for actually giving me the last slot.
You can't do that. We've been waiting for
move
50 minutes for
swimmingly.
you.
So hi, yo, I'm Kwame Otu. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and the class I teach is Queer Africas. I think in the spring it's going to be on Mondays, from 3:30, I guess. I mean, I'm still not sure exactly the time, but the class derives from my own work. I did my work on queer sexualities in Ghana. So the class is called Queer Africas with an S at the end of Africa, just for you to think about the fact that we are not only invested or interested in Africa, but we are looking at, you know, queer embodiments that are of African persuasions in Europe, in the African Atlantic or the Black Atlantic, so then the Caribbean, the United States, Afro-Latin America. This class is very important because it begins with the anthropological question: what is Africa to you and what is queer to you, right? I think these questions open us up to the fact that, you know, queerness and Africanness have a lot in common that people often, or scholars usually, gloss over. So the class in a way is trying to actually demonstrate the utility, the analytical utility of Africanness, right, as a site of queer possibility, and the benefits of Africa to how we study the world, right? Very often Africa, like queer, is somehow constructed as a negation, right? And so then we enter the class to think about the entanglements between queerness and Africanness and how these entanglements can actually allow us to question and interrogate, if you will, what we regard as, you know, normative, right? So that if normative is attached to whiteness or normative is attached to heterosexuality, then in what ways, right? What functions what is Africa's function? What is queer's function? Right? How are these two constructs both effective in how we actually speak back to normativity, by which I mean racial normativity and heterosexual, heterogender normativity. So some of the texts we read in the class range from Neville Hood's African Intimacies to Vincent Woodard's The Delectable Negro. We read Kathy Cohen's The Boundaries of Blackness, right? And so many other texts, Omisa Kittinsley's Thief in Sugar. So in a way, we are trying to complicate both Africanness, because when people think about Africa, or the rhetoric around Africa is that Africa is not queer, right? And when you're thinking about queerness, queerness is also always quite white, right? So we are basically in the class contending with the question, why these representations, and how do these various texts allow us to do the work of dismantling these representations. Not only do we do that, we also review the works of artists, right? So then we, for example, explore the artistic work of Kehinde Wiley, right? We usually watch films by Cheryl Dunye, Watermelon Woman, and also Janelle Monáe's Dirty Computer. So there is a lot of things that's going on in the class. And mind you, because it's a 4,000 level class, you will be writing a 20-page paper, which we would work on together, right? So then the 20-page paper somehow builds on your midterm, right? And for every unit, there are 5 units in the class. Every unit requires that you write an essay demonstrating your understanding of the unit. And so this is a very intimate class, and I particularly center myself because I'm queer and Black, and I like to tell stories. So it's also really a kind of storytelling. The class is intended to also be fashioned along storytelling, right? What does it mean to teach while telling stories, right? Or how does storytelling become a site of pedagogy? So, I hope you all would enroll in the class. I see some students here. Kiara, how are you? Kiara has taken courses with me in the past. But I hope to see you all. And I would hope and wish that you all major in our courses or in our program. Thank you.
Here. Awesome. Thank you so much. We have a couple minutes, and so you're welcome to stay. I'm gonna just open some breakout rooms. You're welcome to stay in the main room. I'll ask faculty to stay in the main room. So students, if you want to get a chat by yourselves, you can do so without us listening in on your conversation. So feel free to jump in the rooms. They're self-assigned, so you can just pick whichever rooms you'd like. And the faculty will just hang back, and you can hang back and ask us questions as well. We'll stick around for a couple more minutes. So thank you all for coming, and we'll look forward to having you in our classes. And we're here by email for any questions that you might have. All right.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to take all these classes.